Welcome back, everybody, to Two Deans and No Waiting. My name is Dean, and in the studio today we have Taz again, and first-time guest. Yes, I'm going to. This is my buddy. I've known him for a long time, and we've been anticipating this moment to have the Colonel in here, Colonel Rebel Jon Michaels. Thank you for coming to the studio today.
Thank you so much, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here. I hear it's like being in Piper's Pit sometimes, but I
Just wait a second, brother!
Oh,
Just wait a second! I don't like when you come out here with your big beard. You kind of do look like Hillbilly Jim, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Don't mess with the country boy.
Yeah, I know that. And nevertheless, you were supposed to come on last week, but you couldn't. You were busy. Get it? How ironic, the week you were supposed to come on, and all that stuff was going on in Los Angeles, with the protesting, the synthetic protesting, and we're almost in the midst of World War III. We'll get to all that later. Whole bunch of news. I don't even know where to start. But I do want to talk about the Civil War. That's why I wanted to bring you on. Talk about the Civil War through the eyes of the South.
Oh, well, it's a topic that I'm very passionate about.
Yes, you very are.
So I had ancestors that fought on both sides, actually, for the Confederacy and for the Union. A couple of great-grandfathers for the Union and several other great-grandfathers for the South. And it's a very interesting topic to study. When I was a kid, I had this envisionment of two sides that were sort of fighting for good, but just one had a different vision of what was good than the other had for the vision. And then you go through school and they pound in your head, Abraham Lincoln is a part of the blessed, he's the fourth member of the Beatles of God or whatever,
right.
God's group. And then they talk about, it's all about slavery. Slavery for the South. They're evil. Every one of them, they might as well have been a Hitler in every farm.
Right. But that's how they do it today, right? And that's why I wanted you to come on, and I want to intertwine with what's going on today, because we only hear one side of the story. We don't hear the other side, like what's going on in Russia. What's Russia say about the war in Ukraine? What are the Iraqi people saying about the war in Iraq? What are the Palestinians saying about the war in Palestine? So, you know what I'm saying? I don't like one-sided. I'd like to hear both sides, and that's why you're here, to talk about the Civil War through the eyes of the South.
So the thing about it is, was slavery a part of it? Yes. But guess what? Slavery was a part of the United States of America. And even before that, the American colonies. Slavery existed in this country from the 1600s all the way up until the Revolution. It existed before this country was even founded. So it was already here in an established format. The thing about it is, people have this idea that Southerners rowed their boats down to Africa and ran in the middle of the night into the villages and captured these little black children or something. I don't know. That's not at all what happened.
No, right.
The true history, and this is just the facts, is that African tribal lords and leaders had wars amongst themselves. They captured and took captives, and then took those people and sold them. There was the North Atlantic. Doggone it! What's it called?
It's Donald Trump. Tell him you'll call him back later.
Yeah. So, anyway, there was the North Atlantic slave trade that was coming up here to North America.
Exactly.
And then there was the other one that was going over to the Middle Eastern countries. And if you ever have a chance, there's a couple of books. Now, I haven't read these books. I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't read them. I've read about them. I'm going to be reading them. One of them is called Time on the Cross by Fogel and Engerman. And the other one is a book, I can't remember the name of it, but it's by Eugene Genovese. And basically, they give you the most honest historical view of what slavery actually was.
Now, I just want to, people should know this, that the British brought slavery over to
Yes.
to the colonies.
Yes.
And they were the ones that brought it. And of course, I mean, every and I'm not justifying for slavery.
No.
It's in the Bible. It's in every dynasty on this planet has had slavery. The Greeks,
Every
the
nation,
Babylonians.
every
The
Yes.
word slave comes from
Slav.
the word Slav.
Yep.
The Slavics were I mean, they're not another race or nationality on the planet that was slaves more than the Slavics. The Slavics are more whiter than the people on the Hallmark Channel. That's how white they are, and they were slaves.
And nobody should have to say this, but you have to in today's culture. I certainly do not advocate for slavery in any way, whether it's based on race, skin color, anything like that. I think it's terrible and awful, and I would never want to own a slave, and I would never want to be a slave. But at the same time, it's a historical reality.
Of course, but
it's a fact.
But here's the thing: we're all on the plantation now.
Well, that's true.
We're all on the reservation.
That's
now.
true.
And
that's true.
The banksters are the ones that, basically, we're all slaves to something.
So when Hollywood depicts slavery, they depict a life of abject misery. That there's no joy. That these people they had no autonomy. They were basically made to be robot workers for the landowners.
Well, that's the propaganda that
And that was not the case on most plantations. As a matter of fact, most plantations were small. There was a relationship between the slaves and the plantation owners, and it wasn't something that was cold and heartless. It was a relationship where the plantation owners thought that they were doing good for these people by giving them skills, teaching them skills, providing for them in every way. Slaves were provided for from birth to death.
They had health care.
They had health care.
Unlike some people
They
today.
had housing. They had food. And all they did, they just had to work. We have to work for our food, for our house, and all. But it is different. We're free, and they were not free to go, leave, and come as they please.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Now, like you said, the slaves that worked in house, if the person who owned the plantation died, didn't sometimes they leave the plantation into the house to the workers who were in the house?
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact,
kind of like a part of the family.
Well, as a matter of fact, Dean, if it had not been for the slaves that remained at home during the war between the states, which is what most people call the Civil War.
The South, yeah, that's right. In the North, we call it the Civil War. In the South, it's war between the states.
Right. And if you get in the Deep South, it's the war for Southern independence. But if it wasn't for those folks staying at home, taking care of the houses, and taking care of things around the plantation, the Southern men could not have gone to fight the war that they were fighting. Let me ask you this: if you're a guy going off to fight, and you're expecting that there's some kind of hostility or animosity between your family
and where you live,
and the slaves on your plantation,
right?
Are you going to trust leaving your wife and your kids in the care of these slaves?
Of course not.
But that's what they did.
Well, and the North did invade the South. It was Fort Sumter, right?
Yeah. So at Fort Sumter, we had to go before Fort Sumter. All this goes back to the founding of the country, Dean, because all of it was in a mixed bag. You had totally different cultures between the North and the South,
right.
And it wasn't over slavery. As a matter of fact, when the country was founded, slavery was everywhere, all over the United States.
Well, you had state rights versus federal rights. That's
right. And so
centralized power.
So we always hear about how the North got rid of slavery first. Well, that's true, but it was not out of a sense of we want to do the right thing, let's get rid of slavery. It's not beneficial up here. Slavery only worked in these agricultural areas. in a certain climate. And in the north, they just didn't have that year-round agricultural thing going on.
They had industry.
They had industry there. They brought industry in.
Railroads. And
yes, exactly.
Steel.
Exactly. And so when they realized that it was no longer profitable for them in the north, they didn't just tell their slaves, hey, guess what? You're free to go. No, they sold them to people in the south.
Wow.
They profited off of those slaves.
Right.
It had nothing to do with freeing.
Well, again, like I talked about, this is why I wanted you on here, and I wanted to talk about how I want to intertwine with what's going today with the propaganda, with the lamestream media, when they say, oh, those bad Russians, look what they're doing, they invaded Ukraine, but they don't tell you, and I've said on this show a million times, that NATO is expanding. You know, they're the centralized power today. The Federal Reserves, the Bank of International Settlements, that's the NATO. They're a centralized power, and they're expansionist, and they're taking over old Russian territory. They forgot to tell you that. It's the same thing with the Civil War. They don't tell us exactly what it was fought over.
Absolutely. So by the time you get up to the late 1850s and 1860s, you started having these battles between northern industrialists and southern agriculturalists. And of course, the people who wind up in the government represent the people that are in their areas.
A lot like today.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I don't really think it's like today, because we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Big pharma and
they don't
multinational corporations.
Right, they don't represent us anymore. They
exactly. Yes, exactly.
But they represented the interests of their sections of the country, and they really did grow to be almost two different peoples. The people of the north and the people of the south. It really was not a true harmonious union.
So it was Balkanized then, and it's Balkanized today, but it's even more Balkanized today.
Right. So then you had issues starting with in the late 1700s, going up into the mid 1800s, where the north would come in to try to disturb the agricultural areas and start spreading disunion among the plantation owners and the slaves. And they would start getting this, getting word to the slaves, hey, you should run away. You should go be free. And then when they would
divide the country.
Absolutely.
Divide the South.
Then you would have these instances like, for instance, Nat Turner's Rebellion is a famous one, happened in the early 1800s, and he led what they call a slave revolt. And when you think of a slave revolt, you're thinking, okay, it's a battle, a war between the slaves and the plantation owners. No, this is some guy who's going and saying, you know what, we need to go in the middle of the night and kill the slave owner and his wife and his kids in bed. I mean, that's what they were doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they were like terrorists.
So when stuff like that starts happening in the South, then the Southern aristocracy or the Southern hierarchy, they start getting very firm and hard on slavery. Well, you see, that's perfect reason why we need to have slavery. Right. You see the barbarianism. So it was a sad cycle. It was not a good thing. But at the same time, it's just a fact. It happened. So you get now into the late 1850s, and you have John Brown. Everybody's heard of John Brown.
Yes, we talked about that.
Yeah, we've off camera. John Brown's raised at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. John Brown had come over from Kansas, where he had done basically what I was just talking about Nat Turner doing, but John Brown was a white guy. And they
were abolitionists, weren't they?
Abolitionists. And by the way, abolitionist does not simply, at least at that time, didn't mean that you just wanted to abolish slavery. It meant that you wanted to see slavery abolished so much that you were willing to commit atrocities to make sure that it happened. We're talking about, to kind of making an equivalency to today's terms, people who bomb abortion clinics because they're against abortion.
Or like or like far left radicals, like the
in LA that are burning cars and stuff like
anti-fascists.
Yes.
Antifa. Which are not anti-fascists, they're actually pro-fascist.
Do they have good points to make? Yes, they do. Are they going all about it the wrong way? Yes, they are.
Yeah.
So John Brown comes in to West Virginia, which at the time was still part of Virginia. and he's got a band of merry miscreants, and they come in to basically start a slave uprising against the plantation owners. Well, here comes they go to the arsenal, the armory at Harper's Ferry, and a black guy, a black citizen, sees them, and he's going to run and tell somebody. They shoot and kill him.
Wow.
Nobody ever talks about the first guy that died, the first casualty at Harper's Ferry because of abolitionist John Brown was a black guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know they don't tell you that, but it seems to me that, you know, it sounds like a lot like what would happen today if right now there's some oil tankers that blow up in the Middle East, but let's just say it wasn't done by Iran, it was a false flag, you know, just to justify a war. Yeah. So this is what he was doing, was basically, you know, radicalizing, balkanizing, dividing the South, to cause trouble because there's another agenda they had planned.
Yes. And by the way, that fella's name, Haywood Shepherd. I think it's important to say their names, Haywood Shepherd, because nobody knows about him, but he was a casualty.
So he was sacrificed.
He was a casualty because of the radical abolitionists. And so when this happens, they get into the armory and they hold up because the alarm winds up getting sounded. Now here comes the authorities. A town mayor was killed. U.S. Marines wound up getting killed. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And they send in the army.
What was their true agenda? Because there's always another agenda, right? What was their true agenda? That didn't sound like to me like they really wanted to. They were using that as a front for something else to destabilize the South, basically.
That was the agenda. Because when you get right down to it, the fight over slavery in the antebellum period was not about helping free the slaves. It was about helping to undercut the political power of the South in the federal government. They wanted to basically have more industrial interests represented in the federal government than agricultural interests in the federal government.
And you know what? It's a lot like what you see today, how they've weaponized certain groups, certain young people or African Americans they wanted to weaponize to use against for whatever, to destabilize America, to balkanize America, to create a one world system.
Right.
We talked about that because they do have agendas, and that was a part of the agenda of what he was doing.
Now I've got a quote that I want to pass along to you here. Let me just see if I can find it real quick. Okay, so this is a quote from somebody in the days leading up to the war between the states. You tell me who you think said it. Quote, this is not my words, this is this guy's words. While the white and black races remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race.
Benjamin Netanyahu. Just a wild guess.
Any guesses there, Kaz?
Good guess.
I'm going to guess Abraham Lincoln.
You would be 100% correct. That was the words of Abraham Lincoln, the so-called great abolitionist emancipator himself, in 1858, leading up. That's just literally 2 years before the southern states started to secede.
Now, I do know he wasn't a big fan. He basically said in his memoirs, if he could end the war without ending slavery, he would.
Well, yeah.
Wasn't he the one that also brought up the idea to ship the black people to Cuba?
So, well, he didn't start that idea. That idea came before him,
okay.
But he was pushing that idea. So let me backtrack just a little bit. So Lincoln starts going and basically working for first he was a Whig. We don't even have Whig party anymore here in this country.
Right. Wow.
And then the Whig party fell apart. By the way, you know who else was a Whig? The Vice President of the Confederate States of America, Alexander Stephens. That's right.
So they were together at one time.
At one time, they were in the same political party, and they held similar views on race. And so then Lincoln starts making these speeches and all this. He's working for the Senate, and then he's running for the presidency. Well, when they start having the Republican Party after the Whig Party falls apart. What it was is the Northern Whigs basically formed the nucleus of the Republican Party to start it off, while the Southern Whigs wound up having no other party to go to, so they went to the Democrat Party.
The Know Nothing Party. What about that?
They weren't there at the time.
They weren't there yet.
No, they had already come and gone.
That's called the Neocons today.
That's not far off.
Yeah.
So you have these the factions are splitting, and now you have Abraham Lincoln running as a Republican for president. Now, unlike our time, in those days, the states allowed the political parties to produce the ballots for their candidates.
Wow.
So when you would go to vote, you don't just get one ballot that has everybody on it. You'd come up and say, "Yep, I'd like the Republican ballot," or "I'd like the Democrat ballot."
It's kind of like you're at Wendy's. I'd like a large fry, a hamburger, a Coke.
Right,
and then
right.
somebody hands you a ballot, and
Right.
off you go.
The Republican Party did not have anybody working to get Lincoln elected in the South. So when modern day talking heads are always like, well, the South, they wouldn't even put Abraham Lincoln on the ballot. That's not the case. The Republican Party didn't even have ballots out in the South. There was huge parts of the United States at the time who had never even heard of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, because it's not like today, right? I mean, you got
Right.
social media, you got the internet, you got cable. It's, this is, there was a printing press. I think Gutenberg, when did but you know what I'm saying?
Right,
He
yeah.
created I can't remember what year he created the printing press. You might have had that, but that's about it, right?
Well, the only, even at that point, about the only people that were reading, especially down in the South, were your preachers and your politicians.
Right.
Your average farm worker was fairly illiterate in things when it comes to reading and writing and things like that. Now, you want to talk about building a house? Well, you go get one of them Southern farmers. He can build you a house. He couldn't write you the instructions, but he could get you a damn good house built. You know what I'm saying? It'll stand for 150 years.
I have a hell of an outhouse too, I'll tell you.
So Lincoln winds up getting elected, also in large part because the Democrat Party split. Okay, you had three different factions.
That's going to happen again.
You had three different factions, and so in the South, they had these ballots, three different candidates for president. None of them are named Abraham Lincoln. And what do you know, when they wake up on the day after Election Day, or whenever they found out who won, Abraham Lincoln, who in the heck is this guy? It's this northern guy who's all of his interest is with the industrial North. He doesn't give a rip about us farmers down here in the South. And Lincoln did make speeches where he said that he was not in favor of slavery. Even though he was racist, he didn't like slavery. With that being said, Lincoln also worked in the run-up before the war. He worked to try to reach a compromise with the southern states. It was the original plan for the 13th Amendment. You can look it up. It's called the Corwin Amendment. It should be called the Lincoln Amendment. Because
What's this amendment?
This amendment to the United States Constitution, if it had passed, would have made slavery in the South untouchable.
Oh, wow.
It would have made it
Really?
permanent in the states where it existed at that time.
And he was pushing for this amendment?
He was pushing for this amendment.
Wow.
Lincoln is from Kentucky, so yeah, that ideology, yeah, and it was all over. It wasn't just the South, and and I talked about before how Lincoln invaded the South of the Fort Sumter, right? And he sent troops down there, the federal powers, to basically strong arm the South because they wanted to govern themselves.
Yes. So when Lincoln gets elected, South Carolina and some of the other southern states were like, you know what, we've had enough. But who's going to take the lead and say we're leaving the Union first? And then all of a sudden the question also is, can we even leave the Union? Now they said yes. They were firm. Yes, we can. But no state wants to do that by themselves, to take a leap off into the dark.
Well,
So South Carolina starts going kind of back channels, talking to other governors and stuff.
Fort Sumter was in South Carolina.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we do it, you'll jump with us, right? South Carolina secedes from the Union December the 20th, 1860. When they seceded, it triggered the chain of other governors and state legislatures voting to leave the Union.
You could see that today.
And by the way, unlike what, again, modern talking heads and historians, or as I call them, mythstorians, will tell you, secession is exactly what the colonies did from Great Britain.
Right, exactly.
It does not have to equal war. It's just saying, you know what, I'm checking out.
Well,
now, in the case of the colonies leaving England, it was treason. Legally, it was treason because it was against the will of the king.
Right, exactly.
Okay? In the case of the United States, however, it was not treason, despite what the mythstorians will tell you. And if you take a look at the United States Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, we always talk about the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. Nobody ever talks about the 10th Amendment. What's the 10th Amendment say? All powers that are not in this document already enumerated to the federal government thereby are in the rights of the states. There's nothing in the Constitution that said you cannot leave this union. So the states said, hey, if it doesn't say we can't,
right,
we're going to.
So if, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
As a stark raving conservative and a true conservative, because I know you really are.
Okay.
So let's say California,
yeah,
wanted to govern itself.
Yes.
What would you say?
I would say go for it. And God bless you. Have a nice time.
Now, because we almost seen something like that last week.
Yes, that's right.
And I kind of feel like Los Angeles is the new Fort Sumter. Where for liberals.
They might want to make it that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For liberals.
Yeah.
I know I'm twisting it, right? And how Trump is talking about sending federal troops. See, this is a hypocrisy. A lot of conservatives and a lot of Republicans cannot stand centralized power. But if a Republican does it, it's okay. Well, hey, no problem. But, if you're a true conservative, you should know that state rights, right? California's got a right to govern itself. When in Rome, right?
Sure. Well, okay. So when we wanted to talk about California for a second.
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to compare.
Let's talk about California for just a second.
I think we could be in the midst of another civil war.
So
and somebody's pushing it. Of
course. Thanks to the amendments that did come after the war between the states, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments, we have a national citizenship now. It's used to it was based on the states. The states had the right to dictate who was a citizen of their state and who wasn't. After the war between the states, that's no longer the case. You're a citizen of the United States now. And so issues regarding immigration are in the federal purview. That's why you can't say that Gavin Newsom has any legal or moral high ground.
I'm not a
no, I know.
But I mean, as far as I believe in state rights over centralized power.
So Newsom
and Newsom, although he's a stark raving liberal, but see, like I said, my problem with the left and the right, it's all about who's in power, right? Governor Newsom doesn't give a shit about the Constitution. Where was he 4 years ago when they shut the whole country down and you couldn't take a shit without a vaccine?
Right.
So yeah, he's very centralized power too. But in this situation, if I was just asking you a question, a hypothetical, if California said, fuck you, we're going to handle this with the National Guard, then he's got the right to do that under the Constitution instead of having centralized power.
He had
doing
the right.
Another Lincoln, like what Lincoln did.
Trump had absolutely no constitutional right to federalize the Guard and send them in without Gavin Newsom's request. And then also, that's the same, and it goes even more so with sending in the Marines. He had no right.
Exactly, I'm totally against that. Now because now you got a civil war, and that could easily happen.
Right. Now you can send federal law enforcement in to guard and protect federal property. So the federal building there in Los Angeles, Trump had every right and every right to go ahead and send federal law enforcement to guard that building. And trust me, they didn't need to send the National Guard or the Marines. The the police, the federal law enforcement is militarized. True. They have military grade weapons. They have military grade body armor. They basically are soldiers with just a little bit of a different mission.
Before I lose my thought here. Yeah. Okay. Now, the way the abolitionists balkanized the South and basically divided it and caused this kind of almost like sectarian violence in a way. We're seeing this all over, and it's done by the CIA and Mossad. There is an entity doing that to our country now, balkanizing our country, because they want to divide it up. They want to split America the way they did Russia. You know, I see that. But this civil war is very important. I've brought you on here to talk about where we were and where we're going. It's like it's going back to where we've been. We're even more balkanized today than we were back then, I think. And this was the beginning of central takeover of everything, because you talked about it off camera. This war was so pivotal that it not only changed the country, but it changed the whole world. Because not even shortly after that, you had the Russian Revolution, right?
That's right.
Which was in 1917. Of course, I mean, when you talk in history, it wasn't too far. You're talking maybe 50 years.
75 years.
Okay, but then that was a huge, too. And then you got the Bolsheviks and, wow. I mean, and what I want to talk about is small government is gone. It's all centralized power. And this was kind of the beginning of that. Right?
It really was. As I said a few minutes ago, at that time, there was so much power that was in the hands of the states. I mean, literally, if you read the Constitution,
and it's totally taken away
up through the 12th Amendment, it's really not that much power in the hands of the centralized federal government.
And you know, we always talk about NATO. We always talk about the Bank of International Settlements, the World Trade Organization, the UN. That's centralized power, man. Taking away from local government. You know, creating this one world system. Where are we at today? We're almost on the verge of World War III. What's their agenda? The way they destabilized the Middle East, you're telling me they destabilized the South. And that's basically stirring the pot, right?
Absolutely.
So this is why I wanted to bring this up, because I think, you know, the Civil War was very pivotal, and centralized power has taken everything over, right?
Well, yeah, so let me throw this out at you. So leading up to Fort Sumter, right? The North, by and large, most of your people, most of your newspaper editors, they were in favor of saying, let the South go in peace. Why try to keep them in here? If they don't want to be a part of this union, let them go. Lincoln couldn't have that. He's going to wind up being president come, you know, March 4th, because at that time Inauguration Day was March the 4th, not January 20th.
He says he wants to unite the country, but basically what he wants to do is federalize the country.
Yeah. So as soon as South Carolina secedes from the Union, you had these troops that were stationed at Fort Moultrie off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, right across the water from Fort Sumter. You can see one from the other. I've been there. I've seen it. And these troops at Fort Moultrie knew that their position at Moultrie was not easily defendable. So in the middle of the night, they spike all the cannons.
Wow.
And they get in the rowboats and they row on over to Fort Sumter and take a defensive position, even though they have not been ordered to by anybody.
Right.
That was the first act of aggression in the war between the states, because they took
South Carolina.
Yep, they took that defensive posture, uncalled for, unnecessarily. There was nobody that was coming to hurt them over at Fort Moultrie.
But then later, of course, he sent more troops. And
well, what wound up happening, Dean? For months. So we went from December 20th all the way up and through mid-April before there was ever a shot fired. And in that period of time at Fort Sumter, you had the federal troops that are basically holding up there. And you have South Carolina that's trying to work. They sent peace commissioners to Washington, D.C., first to talk with President Buchanan, who was the president before Lincoln, then to talk with Lincoln and his people. They were trying to peacefully negotiate the transfer of the fort. The whole purpose, even though, yes, the federal government did have ownership of Fort Sumter, the whole purpose of the forts at Charleston, South Carolina, was to protect Charleston Bay, that whole area. Well, if South Carolina is not in your union anymore, why do you need a fort at South Carolina?
And they did tell them to take your Yankee boats and get the hell out of here and take the fort with you.
Well, they said it much nicer than that.
They just say, get the goddamn hell out of here, damn it, and don't come back.
But every time they tried to negotiate, they were given subterfuge. Well, Lincoln's busy today. He might see you tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, God, he's got a headache, whatever. They gave him the runaround, and so then you get finally to the point where the troops that are at Sumter are getting hungry and they're running out of food.
Wow.
Okay. Now, up to a certain point, South Carolina was making sure they stayed fed, even though they shouldn't have been there. They were sending food and mail, and they even let people from Fort Sumter come back over to the shore to do shopping and stuff, to shop for food. But at some point, it's like, okay, you guys got to go. You can't stay forever. So they're going to run out of food. They send a letter to Washington. Lincoln says, "All right, we're going to try to send something." And the word gets out, Lincoln's going to try to send something. The South says, don't send anything, or else it's going to be considered an act of aggression. If we see ships from the U.S. coming in here, it's going to be considered an act of aggression, and we will defend ourselves.
So let me ask you a question. And I know slavery was maybe 10th on the list of things that they were concerned about. Everything's about money. Everything's about resources. I get that. And and I do believe that it was federal powers versus state powers, and that's when the country became more, the centralized power shifted all to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
They didn't want the South to govern itself. I know that. Now, my question would be, how long do you think slavery would have lasted if the Civil War didn't exist?
Well, it's obviously hard to put a specific time frame on something like that, in a what-if scenario. During the war, Lincoln was making offers to southern states. If you'll come back to the Union, we will let you have slavery until about 1900.
Well, they didn't tell me that in history class, damn it.
Yeah. And so he was making these offers to the South. Yeah, well, if you'll just go ahead and come on back in, we'll work with you. You guys can keep slavery till about 1900. You'll have about 40, 50 years to kind of get it figured out on what you're going to do without it.
Wow, so, Lincoln, wow. Yeah, you don't learn about that, of course, because we were taught Civil War through the eyes of the North, right? Yeah. And this is why I want you on here.
Well, at the end of the day, Dean, the reason that slavery was such a major issue, and it's the issue that everything seems to focus on, is because slavery was really a constitutional issue and an economic issue.
Of course. The North did not survive off slavery.
Right.
They survived off textiles, steel, industry,
but
railroads.
Where did they get their cotton to make their textiles? From the South.
Right.
So they're profiting off of slavery, even though they don't have any slaves there in the North.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because usually, I'm pretty good when it comes to, deciphering what happens after a war. And I know war is a racket. It's like you said, this was all started by the abolitionists, who basically had another agenda. Do you think there was an agenda there not only to federalize and centralize the whole country, make Washington the centralized power and authority? Do you think maybe there was money involved? Like, whatever happened to the I know the South had money.
The South was the wealthiest part of the country at the time.
The South had more money than the
I
North.
know that. So what happened to the money? That's my question. Who took the money?
Well,
kind of like Saddam Hussein was worth $100 billion. Who's got that money?
Well, after the war was over, it wasn't like the states were just like, oh, well, welcome back. Now you're part of the government again. We're gonna no. The North sent in troops, and they already had the troops.
Where'd all that
there.
money go? Where'd all the Southern money go?
They took it all. They took it all
and put it into probably New York banks.
As a matter of fact,
you are lying now.
Hey,
I don't believe you. No.
No, listen. There were guys in the Confederate military who wrote books, and they talked about visiting the North after the war, and that they saw jewelry that they knew who it belonged to, but it was around the neck of some Yankee woman up in Massachusetts or whatever.
The spoils of war.
Yeah. So, and by the way, the families that wound up keeping their stuff, you know how they got to keep it? Because the slaves that were still at home, they would take, while the family's off hiding somewhere, the man's off at war, the slaves at home, they said, you know what? We don't want to see our master's home burned. We don't want to see their stuff stolen. They would take all the gold, all the jewelry, all the money and everything. They would bury it, hide it in bedposts. Because when the Yankees came in, they would steal everything that wasn't, and if it was nailed down, they'd pry it up and take that too.
And like I said, this is why I have you on here, because we like to. We think outside the box. I want to know both sides of the story. Like, we never taught these, and you brought up a good point. We talked about World War II. They never tell you why Japan, we bombed Pearl Harbor. They never tell you why they bombed Pearl Harbor. They never tell you that America put an oil and gas embargo on the country. And what did Japan say? If you put oil and gas embargo, we're going to go to war. Kind of like the Lusitania. Do not put that ship in the water. That's what Germany said, and Germany U-boats blew it up onto the water. And so, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
You're never taught this stuff, and that's why I got you on here. And this is why I want to make people, which more people are awake today than they were 10, 20 years ago. Don't trust the media. Please do research. Think for yourself.
Well, Dean, I want to get back to this main point. It's a huge point that I want to make. So when it comes to slavery and why they put such a focus on it, and why it's in all those documents that they always talk about, see, it was all about slavery. No, Kaz, if you're a property owner, whatever kind of property, and the federal government says you're not allowed to have that kind of property anymore, and you're not going to be compensated for it.
That's called imminent domain.
Right.
It's just gone. Is that right or wrong?
No, that's
okay.
wrong.
Okay. Now, while we would certainly agree that it's wrong, we have the modern day foresight to say it's wrong to own a person or to own the labor of another person. At that time, that was the law of the land, and so these people looked at it as a constitutional issue. If they can come in and take slavery away, what else can they come in and take away tomorrow?
Smoking, drinking, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of shit, you name it. They've taken everything away.
There was never once where in Congress they tried to actually vote to end slavery. There was never a proposal prior to the war between the states to have a constitutional amendment to outlaw slavery. Now, when the Confederacy started, everybody tells you the Confederate Constitution was a pro-slavery document. It made slavery permanent and all that. That's crap. In the Confederate Constitution, if you put it side by side with the U.S. Constitution, it's almost a carbon copy of the document. And all it did, it made some wording a little different, and it basically, in regards to slavery, it had it on equal footing with where slavery stood in the United States in 1865. So it was literally no different. It was a war between two slave-holding republics. There were still slave states in the North. As a matter of fact,
hold on. So you mean to tell me there were states in the North that still had slavery during the Civil War?
During the war between the states. That's right.
Wow.
And there were Republican slave owners, by the way.
Right. Like you said, at one time the whole country was. Then of course the North.
Yep.
For reasons, because they probably weren't making money off it because of agriculture and climate.
Absolutely. So they had these huge differences over constitutional matters. Yes, slavery was, as they say, it was like the spark that lit the fuse.
Right.
But the fuse by itself doesn't explode. It's the keg that's underneath it of constitutional and economic issues. And the whole thing about slavery for the South, it wasn't because they hated black people. They didn't hate black people. They didn't hate or want to kill or exterminate. They try to compare the Confederacy to the Nazis. There was a movie that came out. It was supposed to be based on a true story.
There's a lot of things about Nazism we weren't taught. You know that Hitler had 30,000 Jews in his army? There we go. This is what we're talking about. And he got money from the Bank of New York. Who do you think built Hitler? The West created Hitler. Yeah, that's things you don't learn. I learned after high school. But this is why I got you on here, because this is what our show's about. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
that's
I had
okay.
to.
That's
because
okay.
it's exactly, they tell you about the Nazis and how bad they were. Well, who gave money to European royalty, Western industry, Ford, Carnegie, Rockefeller, you name it, the Rothschilds? They all were involved in creating the Third Reich. Third Reich means army for the rich. They don't tell you that. But go ahead.
Okay, are you familiar with the famous photograph from the time period of the slave and he's got his back turned to the camera, and you can see all the scars that are on his back. It's one of the most famous photos of a slave.
I've seen things like
that. Okay. So they made a movie a couple years ago, supposed to be based on a true story on this guy's story. And as a part of the movie, they had it set up and showing that Confederate leaders or plantation owners or whatever would take the runaway slaves, and that they would take and cut their heads off and put their heads on a pike.
Wow.
That's not true. That never happened.
Wow.
There's not a single recorded instance of something like that in the war between the
It
states.
sounds like Vlad the Impaler.
Right. Now, I'm not saying that nobody ever did it in the South, but not during the war period. Maybe back in the early, I think I did read something about a plantation in Louisiana, but it might have even been before Louisiana was in the United States.
Oh, they were still a part of the French colony.
It might have been at the time, but it was not any time during the war between the states,
Wow,
and that
that's
would
a
have
good
never
point.
been accepted. And there were laws, by the way, against mistreating your slaves intentionally. They think that it was that it was a badge of honor. People, the way they talk today, you would think, slave owners got extra money if they beat their slave. No, that's not true. Why would a slave owner want to beat a slave?
Well, because that's basically like
beating
up your car.
I was going to say
up your car.
That would be like poking holes in your tires, or
I mean,
or
right.
pouring water in the oil of your engine.
I get what you're saying. That's why they had health care, because people today don't have health care.
Right.
How good does that make you feel? Slaves in the South had health care and you don't.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is actually a really intriguing question. Was it more important for the North to gain political dominance or financial dominance over the South?
Political dominance was going to mean financial dominance. And so they were hand in hand. I think you would probably agree, even today, money follows power.
Oh, of course.
And power follows money. They're trying to flow down into the same stream.
But just ask the District of Criminals; they'll tell you that.
And people that want power and want money, they will reroute the river to get it into their pond, away from you, and let you go, have a drought while they're getting all the water.
So basically, the North wasn't making as much money as the South.
No, that was clear.
And they wanted to cut in on their, money,
well,
right? That's what gangsters do.
Financially.
Right, sure.
Compared to the South, the North was.
So they needed an excuse to go to war. Kind of like when everything fails, they take you to war. The Great Depression, World War II. I mean, come on, it's all set up that way, and that's what it sounds like here.
Well, and this is where the money comes in. So when they finally get down to it, and people are saying, Lincoln, why don't you just go ahead and let them go in peace? And he says, well, what about collecting tariffs at those southern ports? That's some of our biggest money makers. That's where how we fill our federal coffers.
But that's
from the southern ports.
But that's what King George did.
If they leave, and meanwhile the South is saying, look, you get all kinds of money from us. When we go to war, it's mostly Southern men that are going and fighting your wars for you. So we're giving you our blood and our treasure, and now you want to take away the rights that are guaranteed to us in our Constitution? That's why they were ticked off, fellas. It had nothing to do with race,
right.
Or slavery by itself. Slavery was just a smaller part of the bigger issue.
Just like the war on terror, bullshit. It's nothing to do with the war on terror when you fund it. It's an excuse to go to war. It's the same thing today.
Yeah. Now let's look at during the war. We had Virginia wound up getting split. You kept what we now know as Virginia today, but then what we call West Virginia, that used to be a part of Virginia.
Right.
And they always say, well, West Virginia wanted to leave the Confederacy because they were against slavery. They were against the Confederate. That's not true. I've got a book that's this thick, that's full of the names of the soldiers that fought for the Confederacy out of West Virginia. And that's all it is names. Not biographical information, just lists of names. And so those counties, what they wound up doing is they had the ballots set up. Most of the people that were voters, if there had been no war, they were off fighting the war. And so the people that were left behind were people that came in, and they said, yeah, well, we're going to take over here in the Western Virginia, and we're going to influence everybody. They wound up basically stealing West Virginia from Virginia, and they did so unconstitutionally, by the way. The Constitution actually has a prescription. If you want to be your own state, if you're, like, let's say the Upper Peninsula wanted to secede from the Lower Peninsula of Michigan.
They've tried that before.
Yeah, they've actually tried that before.
If they wanted to, there's a procedure, but the governor, I think, the state has to sort of agree on it, and then it has to go for a vote before.
So that's what.
Virginia's governor never agreed.
That didn't do that.
Virginia's governor never agreed for that.
So when did West Virginia become?
1863 is when,
during
right
the
in the
Civil
middle
War.
of the war.
Right in the
Yes,
middle of the war.
yes, right.
Okay.
And guess what? It was admitted to the Union as a slave-holding state.
Wow.
As a slave-holding state. So
they
again,
were still a part of the South.
They were still a slave-holding state that was claimed by the North, even though they were still right there with.
Okay, so
because West Virginia is
they
basically in between Virginia and Ohio.
Yeah. So they annexed it.
They annexed it. Yeah.
That's what they did.
Yep.
And you know what really cracks me up is people like Mark Levin, who, I mean, they stroke Lincoln's. Every day they're stroking Lincoln.
He is a high priest in the Church of Lincoln.
Yeah, exactly. But then he's going to bitch about Vladimir Putin, right? And, oh my God, he's a tyrant. But, come on. Isn't Putin, well, Putin's fighting for survival. What was Lincoln fighting over? Control?
He was fighting for federal control over the states.
Over the South.
So let's fast forward.
So who's the tyrant?
All right, now we're going to fast forward, Dean. We're going to get to the end of the war. The South winds up basically having to submit because they had all these people get killed. They had no resources. Everything got cut off by the blockades, and they called it the Anaconda strategy, to basically strangle off any way for them to get food, weapons, supplies, etc.
That's because the North had the rail transit. That's what.
Right. Yeah, they were tearing up railroads. Matter of fact, they have down south. They have some on display still. Railroad ties that were torn up off the ground,
really?
And then they would have them bent.
Wow, so they couldn't use them again.
And when they're bent,
now who's
they
doing that?
look
South?
like a ribbon or
South
like
was doing that.
No, this is North. Well, they both did it, but Sherman's troops were coming down to disrupt the southern rail lines, and when they would do it, it looked like a little knot.
So sabotage, basically.
They're called Sherman's neckties. That's what they call them down there. Yeah, Sherman's neckties.
Wow. So I mean, you're telling us what happened towards the end and how the South lost.
So when the South loses the war, they basically, the federal government comes in. They declare all of the state legislatures and the governors void. You're out of office.
Wow.
And we're installing
our guys,
because we're putting you under military rule. And they had the South set into military districts that were run by district governors for these states. And then what they also did, they took the voting right away from everybody who was in the Confederate Army. If you served in the Confederate military, all of a sudden you have no political voice. And at the same time, they gave the political voice to the African American population. Which, what does that do? That ticks off the whites against the blacks.
There you go.
Again, it had nothing to do with the color of their skin. It had to do with the fact that my rights got taken away and given to somebody else.
Right.
All because I answered the call of my state to defend my state.
It's called divide and conquer. That's still going on today.
They also had not just troops down there, but they had organizations down there. One of them was called the Union League. The other one was called the Freedmen's Bureau. And basically their whole purpose was to tyrannize and tyrannize whites who had land. They would steal land from white landowners and hand it over to some, but not very many, black folks.
Well, that's kind of happening now in South Africa.
Yeah,
There's a lot of that going on in South Africa.
Most blacks after the war, because, again, everybody thinks, God, they freed the slaves and they wanted to give them a better life.
Yeah, right.
You know what Lincoln said about the slaves? They said, what are we going to do with all the slaves after they're free? He says, they can root, hog, or die.
Wow.
They can root, hog, or die.
I guess he's.
And guess
he
what?
really- he really
There
cares.
is a book, and I can't remember the title or who wrote it, but there's a book about that, and I think it's called Sick from Freedom, because what it was, instantly these people were given freedom, but they weren't given jobs, they weren't given land, they weren't given anything.
Nothing.
And what you wound up actually having happen in the immediate aftermath of the war is the freed slaves wound up having to go back to
The South.
the white homeowners and landowners and saying, hey,
They know where to go.
we still we don't hold anything against you. We need to work. Can we work for you? And so basically they got this. It was a charity.
They didn't have a plan.
Now, I'm not saying that
they didn't have a plan to do.
No, there was no plan.
No,
No
so
plan
that
to help the
so that
blacks.
tells you they didn't care, and that tells you that's why the war wasn't fought.
If anybody had ever really cared about the slaves prior to the war between the states, what they would have done is found some way to have a plan to give jobs and land to the African Americans. And at the same time, you have to compensate the plantation owner, because all of his money and resources has gone into this system that was okay yesterday according to the United States Constitution.
And all of a sudden,
It's not.
So basically, what it did was destroy the Southern's money flow. It destroyed their economic welfare.
Absolutely.
So that's like kind of taking Medicare away or Social Security.
Oh,
It would-
yes,
it was-
absolutely.
It would crash the country.
It would
So
create
in
a
a
vacuum.
sense, it basically made the South dependent upon the North.
And
Yes,
that's what
yes.
Central Powers want. Right?
And that leads into where Dean really wants to head. It basically destroyed the states and destroyed the differences, because now the South is in a position where they have no choice but to be down on their knees and say, please, master federal government, please help us and give us money and help us out and blah, blah,
you
blah.
got government programs, and it just feeds into the government, and it becomes so self-absorbent, right? And it becomes this huge monster, and that's what's wrong today, right? You got a few greedy son of a bitches that want to take advantage of it. Look at where we're at today.
Now I want to highlight one more thing it's not directly connected to the war, but it is connected into how the federal government took power away from the states. And I believe it's the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the amendment that caused the election of senators to change. We always hear about democracy everywhere today.
Right.
This country was not founded as a democracy. We were founded as a federal republic.
Right.
And so there was...
We don't even have democracy, by the way, but go ahead.
Right, that's true. So the founders were absolutely terrified both of tyranny of the majority, tyranny of the one, which would be like a king, or a tyranny of the minority. But tyranny of the majority is democracy. That's where if enough of us vote, we can vote to take your house from you, right? Okay, so that's democracy.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
but too bad
so
we don't have that either. It's more bureaucracy.
So when it came to voting for federal offices, you had direct elections, true democratic elections for your U.S. House of Representatives. Then for the Senate, you had the state legislatures would choose who their senator would be, which was a part of the showing that the states had power. And then, of course, there was the electoral college system for the president. And the 17th Amendment made it to where state legislatures no longer vote or select their own senators, but rather it's direct election, just like the U.S. House of Representatives. So now the states have absolutely no say in the federal government as entities.
Wow.
So we used to have the three.
They've been disabled.
We used to have three. We used to have individuals have say in the representatives, states have say in the senators, and then a sort of a weird combination of states and individuals have a say in who becomes president.
Crazy.
Now it's just down to the president is and everything's, but the democracy is on both the Senate and the U.S. House, and so basically they're no different.
Right.
When you have that happen and you don't have term limits, you have the ability for these guys to continuously be reelected. They go to Washington and they live there. Before the war between the states, you didn't have lifelong politicians.
No.
These guys would go and they would serve a couple of terms or whatever,
That's it.
but then they have to go back and take care of their farm.
Right. That was the thing. They were farmers.
We didn't have this thing called lobbyists. There were no lobbyists. There were no special interest groups.
Well, I wouldn't say there were none, but
Not like today.
not like today.
It should be like NASCAR. They should come out with Pfizer, with the military industrial
Yes.
complex,
Oh my goodness.
Rand
Yes.
Corporation, Netanyahu, the Foundation for Israel. Oh my God, you name it. Oh, geez.
So now
Look at all these
Halliburton.
corporations. Halliburton.
But
big time.
here's the real big way that negatively affected the country. When we'll just pick a state, Ohio. If your senator before the 17th Amendment, if your senators, one or the other or both, were not actually actively working for the best interest of Ohio, Ohio could say, you know what? I don't like what you're doing in Washington, D.C. You're out of there. We're putting somebody who will work for our interest in
Wow.
there.
Yeah, they
Okay.
don't do that no more.
Now, there's no option for that.
Yeah.
And so now it's just these guys go in, they stay forever. Instead of being the senator from Ohio, you're the senator who has a label that says Ohio, but really you're a Washingtonian.
Right.
Of course.
You're a Beltway serpent
Yeah.
up there in
Yeah,
D.C.
Wall Street banks.
Thank you.
Impeachment means nothing these days.
No.
No, absolutely
You
not.
can get impeached and still stay.
Yeah.
stay
Impeachment
president.
means nothing these days.
So hey, that was great, man. You really, you really hit it with that, because I hope the people listening understand that there's two sides to every story. Innocent till proven guilty. I know everything's backwards, right? War is peace, peace is hate. It's 1984, right? But no,
what I said something to you off camera earlier, and I'm going to say it now. You could not have the march to globalization today without the nationalization, the federalization of this country that happened in 1861 to 65.
Wow.
Because you would have two separate countries. If the South would have won, slavery would have ended again, you asked me how long. I'm just going to say it probably would have been done by 1900 or the early 1900s at the latest.
So it would have resolved itself.
I think 50 years, maybe 50 years, it would have resolved itself. It was no longer going to be economically profitable,
right,
for a number of reasons. But anyway, you would have had these two separate countries, two separate cultures, and Washington, D.C. wouldn't be in control of all of it.
It wouldn't have the power it does today.
No.
And look where we're at today. We're almost on the brink of World War III.
That's true. That's
This
true.
is some crazy shit, and we've talked about it. And
Before we get into that, let's take a break quick.
Want to take a break?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. We got to take a break. He's got to take a shit.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, to Two Deans and No Waiting. It's our second part of the show, and I'll tell you, there's some serious stuff going on right now. I know we joke around on this show, a lot of sarcasm, and I'm really worried about this. And we talked about centralized power and how crazy things have gotten, and these globalists who want to take over the world, and they're the neocons. Let's be honest. This is like something that's kind of keeping me up at night right now. And World War III has entered another phase. It's Israel attacking Iran. Now, from what I hear, I don't know if you guys know, this is what they're saying in the media, alternative media, and the legacy media, which I tend to not believe. They're talking about Donald Trump is giving it 2 weeks now. Is that just bullcrap? From what I hear, he might even start bombing as soon as Sunday. Have you guys heard anything? As far as sources are saying that hopefully he's going to back off the way Obama backed off in 2012 when some of his top military advisors said, look, if you create a no-fly zone in Syria, we're going to go to war directly with Russia. No proxy, a direct war. So I'm hoping he does something like that and he comes to his senses, because this will destroy his legacy. This will destroy the economy. And I agree with Tucker Carlson that this could end the empire.
Oh, that's definitely a possibility. I mean, going to an all-out war at this point, it is going to be just utter destruction. I mean, I think the United States government as a whole knows that this is their last stand. Not only are the people of the United States internally so violent right now, the violence is out of control and it's politically driven. But when you look at the wars and you ask the people don't want this. The people don't want any part of this.
And this is splitting the MAGA community. This is, and I said on our show, I don't know if you guys watch it. Nobody watches. But I'm just saying, Dean and I talked about a few weeks ago how I think that the MAGA movement is going to split. But I thought it would be during the next election. And it already has. Because I'll tell you, the people who are in charge now have to understand the MAGA movement is not your father's Republican Party.
Oh, no.
A lot of these guys are old Democrats who've come over, who don't want war, are anti-war, want a good economy and great jobs. Okay, and this ain't the 1968 Republican Party no more.
And that's the part that people are missing. The whole political diagram in the United States, the whole thing has been moving towards the left, step by step by step by step. And they're still considered the right, but they are so far left from what they were
that they
30,
get themselves
40
on the other
years
side.
ago.
Okay, so this is the thing, man. I don't believe in a two-party system. It's a one-party system.
That's right.
And the Democrats, and this is why I left the Democratic Party almost 20 fucking years ago, is because they sound a lot like the Neocons. Gee, who are the Neocons? Mark Levin, Benjamin Netanyahu. They're loyalists to Israel. I'm sick and tired of, you know what? Before I go into that, let me go into this, okay? The PNAC. The Project Century for a New America was written in 2000. Gee, who wrote that? Donald Rumsfelds, the Dick Cheneys, the Wolfowitzes, the people who are in Israel today, like I said, Benjamin Netanyahu. He was the one that sold us on this war.
Who orchestrated 9/11.
Exactly. And that's real. Okay. He sold us on this war. Okay, on weapons of mass destruction. I know Saddam Hussein has them. I've seen them. I gave them to him. We have to go to war. Come on, man. It's the same old script. And by the way, we've lost every single war since World War II. Okay, they lost Korea. They lost Vietnam. They lost Iraq twice. They destabilized the whole region. What the fuck makes you think they're going to win this war?
Well, here's another thing that's really important. A lot of the young people, the new people that are just waking up, don't realize that this year, 2025, is the 30-year anniversary of Iran is building a nuclear weapon.
He's been saying
the 30-year anniversary.
I have proof.
I sent you.
How long is it?
I sent you.
I know.
They've been saying it for 30 years.
You know what Netanyahu said in the 80s? If we bring down the Soviet Union, we could end international terrorism. I swear. And then he said the same thing. He also said that the PLO was, how ironic, the PLO was a proxy of Russia. You know who created Hamas was Israeli intelligence.
Right.
Just like we created the CIA. I mean, just like the CIA created Al Qaeda. Okay, and they, like you said, we go back 160 years, the Civil War, how the abolitionists, you said, were destabilizing the South. This is what they've done to the Middle East.
Here's a coincidence.
They've destabilized the whole Middle East as a pretext to go to war.
Here's a coincidence. What year was the CIA developed?
I think it was 1945 or 47. It was by Truman.
What year did Israel become a state?
1947.
Right. It was 1 year later. The CIA was made.
Right.
1 year later.
Right.
Israel was a state.
Israel and I'm sorry. Mossad, CIA, British intelligence. It's one and the same.
Well, you know. You brought up Truman, okay? I don't know if you realize this or not, but Harry Truman, you've seen the famous newspaper, Dewey defeats Truman?
Yeah.
It was a close election. Truman was not expecting to win. And all of a sudden he got a visit from some folks and they said, hey, we're gonna help you win this election, but you gotta promise us that you'll help us make Israel a state.
Oh
That
wow!
That you'll help us make Israel
Oh,
a state.
oh, those are the Zionists, right? Those are the Zionists who are starting this war.
He shook the hand. They kept their end. He became president. And then here we have
ironic.
right after that
You
we
slap
have
me on my back, I'll slap you on yours.
Yep.
Theodor Herzl was the Zionist of Zionists. He was the one that proposed the idea in the late 1800s or 1900s, just before World War I. He proposed the idea to start moving Jews into Palestine when it was Palestine, because it was Palestine for 2,000 years. And he also made a deal with England. Well, I go back. He went over to, because you're talking before the end of World War I was the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans had the Middle East, so he went to the head of the Ottoman Empire and said, "Hey, I propose this deal. I'm going to give you all this money. I want to send the Jews into Palestine." He said, "It's not for me to give." And ironically, World War I started and the Ottoman Empire fell and England took over. So he made a deal with England the same way they made a deal with Truman, okay? And to bring down the Ottoman Empire. So once the British took over that region in 1917, the blood money of England, the Balfour Declaration, which I've said on this show before, the blood money of England, the Rothschild money, who was a bankster, created the modern state of Israel. And that's when the movement started. But it wasn't until World War II that Jews were happy in Europe. Until that little event happened, they started going into Israel. And ever in Palestine. And ever since then, it's been awful. Since 1947. I mean, and I'm sick and tired of listening to these pundits say the same shit. It's the same playbook. Weapons of mass destruction. Okay, Saddam Hussein, did he have weapons of mass destruction? No. Muammar Gaddafi, did he have weapons of mass destruction? No. So now they're saying Iran. They've been wanting to go to war with Iran since 2000. And this is the last war. This scares me because this could be Armageddon.
You know what else is the 30-year anniversary?
What's that?
It's the 30-year anniversary of Wesley Clark saying,
right, yeah.
7 countries in 5 years.
That's the PNAC, the Project Century for the New America talks about when he said, these are the countries they want to take down. It was Lebanon, it was Syria, it was Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan,
and Iran was last.
Yeah, and it was Iran. And the Arab
last.
Spring was all CIA and Mossad orchestrated. Synthetic revolutions, right?
The only thing that's different is that it's taken a little bit longer than they had hoped. That's the only difference.
And this is what scares me. Iran is not going to roll over and play dead.
No, you can see it or not.
This isn't Saddam Hussein. Okay, there's 90 million Persians. It's an ancient civilization, a lot like the Greek civilization. Very stubborn, I know. They're not going anywhere. No, they're not going. They're going to fight. And it really irritates me that, the people like the Mark Levins and who else? You watch Fox News and, oh my God, they should just have a picture of Netanyahu, in the background. They should have a picture or a flag of Israel. Whatever happened to America first?
Oh, America's first down the toilet.
I know.
No, you know what it is? It's the MIGA group. Not MIGA, but MIGA.
Make Israel great again.
Right, there you go. Make Israel great again.
No, sorry, it's make Israel great again. Make Israel.
Thanks for the correction, BB.
You're welcome, but listen, okay. The weapons, I know where they're at. They're in Tel Aviv. Of course they're in Tel Aviv.
Nope, no weapons over here.
Yeah.
How about over
Remember
here?
that one?
Yeah.
We got to fight those evildoers. But this is serious stuff, man. And who knows? A lot of people are saying by Sunday, I'm hearing maybe as early as maybe tonight, and maybe by next week sometime. You're gonna see some crazy things, man. This could really get out of control.
Well, here, I got a question. How can Trump do something? How can he make the move and make the call and say, okay, we're going to step in, we're going to get involved, without the authority of Congress? Doesn't the Constitution say that Congress has to vote if we're going to war?
It does, and what actually Donald Trump is
point.
doing right now is treasonous. He is violating the Constitution. He does not have the right he doesn't even have
I
the
agree.
right to put the military in California.
No.
That's also wrong.
Yes, exactly. We talked about that
Right.
through the Civil War, and
Yeah,
Lincoln
Right.
did the same
He doesn't
thing.
have the right to do that either.
And
doing
conservatives are cheering
And
that.
no one's stopping it. Do you know why? Because nobody in America wants to get off their ass and actually do something in real life.
We got to start an anti-war movement. That's what we need. And as soon as I say that, the power's going to shut off.
But this goes back to show you that, like you said, one party, not two, one, and they're both leftist parties.
Yes,
if everybody's
they're
being
both moving
honest,
to the left.
they're all
Very
about
much.
centralized power,
Very
whether it be in this country with the federal government or abroad, the globalization movement. It's all about centralizing the power to one place.
And you told me something a while ago, and it stuck with me. You're so right. It was like once, let's say a Democrat becomes president, they all of a sudden forget about the Constitution. The Republican becomes president, all of a sudden they forget about the Constitution.
Yep.
I guess on a local level, kind of the Republicans seem cool. On a local level, Democrats suck on both levels. They've really lost my respect. I don't like either party, but I remember you saying that. Once they get in power, they totally screw the Constitution. And you talk about Trump. Well, there's another president that should have been arrested. Bush, Dick and Bush. How about
Oh my
that?
God, for sure.
What
For sure.
authorization did they get? It's the same playbook, man. Weapons of mass destruction. But this time, it's going to be a little harder to sell. I already see it, and I see it in people's faces. Because I know before when I talk, people would be like, "Oh man, I didn't believe in a word you say." Now it's like now people listening, like, "Oh, wait a minute."
Well, the reason
Okay,
why
but
they
you
get away
can't
with
be
that-
stupid though. It's the same
Well,
freaking playbook.
People are stupid because they call it, the president calls it a military action
Okay.
as opposed to calling it a war.
Tucker Carlson says this could end the empire. I
believe it.
agree.
I believe it.
I agree.
I believe
And
it.
how funny that this stuff happened a week before. I don't know if that was staged. What's his name? Tesla. Oh my God! I'm giving a break
Elon.
for
Elon
Musk.
Musk.
And was that all staged? Was Elon trying to warn us about something? I mean, was he trying to warn us? Did he knew this was going to happen?
I mean, when they got angry at each
When
other.
they got supposedly angry at each other, I don't know if that was WWF or it was.
It was WWE.
Or whatever. I'm sorry. No, I'm talking World Wildlife Federation.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, okay, I mean, people, man, pay attention, please. I've seen this before. There are no weapons of mass destruction. And if Iran's got nuclear weapons, how do we know? I can't believe the source. We're going to listen to the same legacy media that's continuously lied to the American people. How can anybody listen?
What drives me nuts is how the American people fall for it every damn time.
I think there are some, but I think there's going to be more of a resistance. But this is what scares me. And Israel and the CIA know, Mossad, that they could stage terrorist attacks. They could blow up the USS Nimitz. Now you're going to have moral support. I'm worried about Operation Blackjack. We talked about
Yes.
that. I think I might have told you about that. That's a film slide that you got to watch. It was made in 1999. You're talking 26 and a half years. And how ironic it was in June when all that happened. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but hey, I don't put it past me. In order for Israel to sell this, they can't sell it this time. They're really going to have to stage something huge, and that's what scares me.
The people didn't want to go to war in World War II, so they did Pearl Harbor. They didn't want to go to war in 2000,
Right.
so they did 9/11.
Right, exactly. And
They didn't want to go to
and the
war
Lusitania,
in Vietnam.
the
You
Gulf
know,
of the Gulf of
Gulf
Tonkin.
when the people don't want it, the government makes them go with a false flag.
And Hitler burned down the Reichstag to go to war with to go to war with Russia. And the Reichstag was a lot like the White House for the Germans. So he did that as a pretext to go to war, and he got everybody all on board with that. Invading Russia is insane. But then again, look at NATO. Western Europe hates Russia. They hate Russia with a passion.
That dates back to World War II.
You're going back. I mean, all those wars in Europe. You're talking in Eastern Europe, the Balkans. My family was from the Balkans, Greece. Those wars were such a beautiful area, but so complex. So many different, cultures and different religions, and there's always been issues there. And I do know the West, look at Napoleon. He tried invading Russia. What happened to him? And they're doing it again. They're doing it using NATO. And however, all this stuff, man, it's World War III. Unless this is all smoke and mirrors. Is this all smoke and mirrors? Am I wrong? Is this not World War III?
Hey, look, I was reading it the other day. If this all goes down, Iran has North Korea, they've got Russia, and they've got China.
You know what?
All ready to back them.
You know what? Russia just came out today and said, we are backing Iran, which I knew, but they were kind of holding out the last few days. I heard today that they're back.
Yeah, they're holding out, but you know what? I think that was the same bluff move with Elon Musk and Donald Trump. It's just kind of a bluff move,
now,
just to get the other side to play their hand a little bit.
Okay, I want to ask you guys a question. Since we're talking about bluff moves, do you think Trump is bluffing and he's not going to do anything?
No, Trump is not bluffing at this point in time because
the neocons are basically he's a Zionist.
Because Israel's they're getting their ass handed to them right now. They really are.
Now, see, is this the fog of war? I know that Iran is more stronger than they think, and those missiles have reached their targets.
Yeah.
Now, I know it's tit for tat because Israel's bombarded Iran, but Iran's going to put up a fight. Now, are they really getting their asses handed to them?
The mainstream media
What have you heard?
The mainstream media is playing it down that Israel isn't as defeated as they seem. And I've also read a few alternative news articles that said that Iran was asking for a ceasefire or a peace deal, which I know is crap because they don't want that because their foot is to the pedal to the metal.
This is what scares me, okay? These neocons, who are the Zionists, who are running our foreign policy, want to take down Iran like they did the rest of the Middle East. And basically, wherever the CIA and Mossad goes, Al-Qaeda grows. What a coincidence, because our government backs terrorism.
Absolutely.
They
Yes.
look what they did to Afghanistan. It's like wherever the West goes, Al-Qaeda. Assad was actually the lesser of two evils. He was protecting Christians. He was an Alawite. I've said it a million times on here. Israel, along with the United States, wanted him out. They took him out. Now what do you have? You have a destabilized Syria. So basically you have Al-Qaeda in charge of Syria, Al-Qaeda in charge of Iraq, ISIS, Egypt, all over. It's ISIS, like I said, Al-Qaeda, formerly known as Prince. They changed the name, same flag. I keep saying
it's
The
just
Mujahideen,
like,
ISIS, yeah.
It's
Right,
like
I was
just
just
keep
gonna say, it's
changing
just like
the
in
name.
Afghanistan
It's the
when
same ideology, but it's backed with your tax dollars,
That's right.
Right.
created by your money. And it's the CIA and Mossad doing it. And now they want to do the same thing to Iran.
But let's not forget, who is funding the Mujahideen? Just like you said.
The Mujahideen, of course, you're going back in the 70s. That was the big new Brzezinski when Carter was president.
Yep.
You're going back.
And then you changed
and
the
they did that,
name.
and they did that
Right.
to fight Russia.
Right, and then they changed the name to the Taliban. Now all of a sudden it's the Taliban.
It's Taliban, ISIS, like I said. And Ukraine, who are we backing in Ukraine? The Azov Battalion. The Azov Battalion, they're Nazis. They were linked to Hitler. Hitler used Western Ukraine to invade Russia. So we're doing this today.
Yep, same thing.
And it's scary because this could really, really be disastrous. And I do believe Tucker Carlson, when he said that this could end the empire, but there is an entity out there that wants to end the empire
Yeah.
and break up America into regions or whatever. And in order to create their one world system, this is what they have to do. They have to bring down everything, order out of chaos.
Well,
But Israel wants to become a superpower in the Middle East because they're taking over the Middle East.
isn't it interesting how in the Hunger Games they had 13 and then they had 12 because they got rid of one?
Right.
There was 12 divisions. How many FEMA divisions are there in the U.S.? There's 12.
Yes, there are. And now we're going to have to go to Asshole of the Week. So get your preparation H ready. Anybody want to go first? Because I got my asshole picked out right now. I know we're running out of time. I got to do this.
Well, I'll start off because
Go on.
mine's a little unconventional. Okay, obviously I'm more of the history guy. You guys are the world experts. I'm kind of here in the States, right? And so here in just recent times, during this whole California situation, we had a guy by the name of Victor Davis Hanson. who you often see on Fox News. Mark Levin loves this guy. They think he's the greatest historian, I don't know, since, whoever. But anyway, he put out on Twitter a few days ago, why is Governor Newsom going full Jefferson Davis? Jefferson Davis being the president of the Confederacy, if you don't know.
Oh, wow.
What triggered the American Civil War were state officials who refused to honor federal law, instead boasted of their open defiance of Washington. That precedent apparently is the incendiary model for the weird but dangerous recent behavior of an increasingly unhinged California Governor Newsom. Listen here, Victor Davis Hanson. It's totally apples and oranges. Actually, it's more like apples and hamburger meat. There's absolutely no comparison between what's happening in California and what happened in the war between the states. Anybody can read the history book for themselves and see that. In California, you have an inept governor with Gavin Newsom. He's got the right to call up the National Guard if he wants them, but he's letting his state and city and local law enforcement handle the situation. Is he doing it the right way? No, he sucks at it. He's obviously playing a political game with the city of Los Angeles.
Right.
That, however, does not give any right to the federal government to come in with the National Guard and troops. It's unconstitutional. So, no, it's not in defiance of federal law at all. Now, Newsom cannot interfere with ICE. He can't interfere with these folks that are coming in to actually enforce federal law, but he doesn't have to help them. He does not have to help them at all. He just can't stand in their way. So no, Victor Davis Hanson, you're absolutely wrong. You're historically illiterate. I'm a peon in education compared to you, according to the degrees that we hold.
Oh, he's reading from a script.
But seriously, you are my asshole of the week.
That's a good asshole. You got some preparation H ready, so we're gonna put some on you. Okay, do you have an asshole of the week?
Actually, I forgot about asshole of the week, believe it or not.
Okay, that's fine, because I have an asshole of the week, and he's almost as big as this asshole.
Oh, this guy's probably bigger.
My asshole is, yes.
He's actually in power.
The one and only Senator Ted Cruz, yes, who was on the
Can't believe I voted for that guy.
Tucker Carlson show. Tucker Carlson drilled another hole in his asshole, and he did a great job. But how can you sit there and call yourself a fucking senator and talk about you're loyal to the state of Israel? He says all Americans should be loyal to Israel because that's what he says. Why? Because it's a God-given right to be loyal to Israel? We're talking about Senator Ted Cruz, who wants to drop bombs on a sovereign nation that hasn't invaded a country in 300 fucking years. We've invaded how many countries? There are more atrocities committed under the American flag than the Confederate flag. How about that one, Senator? Huh? How many wars have we been in? And we can't even win them anymore because we have things like the CIA and we have things like Mossad that don't want to win a war. They want to sustain it so they can make money. So yeah, Senator Ted Cruz, I want to ask you a few questions. Since you want to drop a bomb on a country that hasn't invaded us and start World War III and probably start Armageddon, you need to know a little bit more about this country. That they're Persian, they're not Arab, number one. Number two, they're not Sunni, they're Shiite. You don't even know the history of their culture, of this ancient civilization that's been around for thousands of years. This is my problem with people like Senator Ted Cruz. He should have took a loyalty to the Constitution. Instead, he took a loyalty to who? Israel?
He should have took a loyalty to Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, something.
Yeah, right. So Senator Ted Cruz, please, I don't want to go to war because of your neocon friends that want to take over the Middle East.
If I had
don't want to do it.
If I had a dollar bill to hold up, I'd hold it up and say, this is who Senator Ted Cruz and all of our U.S. senators and congressmen and president and everybody else, this is who they take their oath to here.
You better believe it.
The dollar.
Because I'm not taking an oath to Israel or Netanyahu. I'm not. And they want regime change? For what? So they can lose again? But maybe that's the plan. to destabilize the Middle East even more. But you do have a country further next door that has nuclear weapons, Pakistan. Let's not get carried away. Senator Ted Cruz, you are my asshole of the week. And that concludes our weekly show. Hope you join us next week. Thank you, Colonel. It was a great job. We're going to have him back on because he's that good. Grand slam. And
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Kaz. You're always great when we talk international affairs. But I'll tell you, people, keep an eye out, man.
Ted Cruz is MIGA. MIGA.
Ted Cruz is a piece of fucking shit.
That's what MIGA. Make Israel great again.
So I just want to say, keep your eyes on the prize, man. Don't trust the government. And let me tell you something. Shit could hit the fan very soon. I hope I'm wrong. Have a great week. Thank you for joining us.
Nice meeting you, sir.
Thank you. Good to meet you.